You take a 15, 16, 17-year-old kid and you throw him out in the middle of the woods. Like, it was just magic, and it just totally jived with what I enjoyed, with what I liked.
From the river to the valley to the sea. All the places, all the people that you can meet.
Welcome to the Mississippi Valley Traveler Podcast. I'm Dean Klinkenberg, and I've been exploring the deep history and rich culture of the people and places along America's greatest river, the Mississippi, since 2007. Join me as I go deep into the characters and places along the river and occasionally wander into other stories from the Midwest and other rivers. Read the episode show notes and get more information on the Mississippi at MississippiValleyTraveler.com. Let's get going. Welcome to episode 44 of the Mississippi Valley Traveler Podcast. In this episode, I feature an interview with Will Collins, host of the Buffalo Roamer podcast, who had me on his podcast a while back. Will is just a delightful guy, fun to chat with, a deep passion for the outdoors that, as he talks about in this interview, he thinks maybe it was just in his blood. In this interview, we talk about his path to getting interested in the outdoors, which included a couple of very long backcountry trips when he was a teenager, part of a summer camp program he was affiliated with. He describes his path from that point on, leaving home, going out for college, and having a chance to explore his passion for the outdoors away from home for a while, before eventually coming back to run the family farm. But while he was out exploring, he had a source to sea trip on the Mississippi in 2017, and the following year he did a long trip on the Yukon River before he came back home to run the farm. We spent a fair amount of time talking about his trip down the Mississippi, his impressions of the river from that trip, and the people that he met, and the generosity from folks he encountered along the way. The daily rhythm of the trip itself, and we talk a little bit also about the post-trip adjustment. A lot of times at the end of trips, people have told me there's a letdown, sometimes a fairly severe letdown after completion of something big like that. So I was curious to get his take on that. We talk a little bit about the contrast between his trip on the Mississippi and the Yukon. And then we get into some of his other interests, including his podcast, what he's hoping to do with that, the guided trips that he leads. So it's a wide-ranging conversation. He's got a lot to say about being outdoors and wisdom to share from all of his experiences on these lengthy trips. Thanks to all of you who continue to show me support through Patreon. I am grateful for the love that you show, and it keeps this podcast alive. You can join the Patreon community for as little as $1 a month, which gets you early access to the podcast. If you don't want to do that, you can buy me a coffee and just feed my caffeine habit. That's another way to show some support. I appreciate either one of those. To find out how to join Patreon or buy me a coffee, go to MississippiValleyTraveler.com/podcast. There are instructions on both of those. You'll also find at that same link the show notes for the episodes. And if you wish to leave a comment, I would say go to that same link. And now let's get on with the interview. Will Collins is an outdoorsman, wilderness guide, podcast host, and farmer. Just a few things going on there. He has canoed thousands of miles across North America, including a 103-day solo source-to-sea descent of the Mississippi River and a 70-day descent of Alaska's famed Yukon River. He hosts guided backcountry canoe trips and publishes a biweekly podcast called Buffalo Roamers Outdoors, where he speaks with fellow adventurers, sharing stories and passion from the trails. Check out the podcast or join him on a guided river trip at buffaloroamer.com. Welcome to the podcast, Will.
Hey, Dean, thanks. Good to reconnect with you. I actually just talked to somebody else for my podcast last night who we have a mutual connection with, and that's Boyce Uphold. he's got a new book like you do about the Mississippi coming out. So chatted with him last night. He brought your name up, and yeah, good to reconnect with you and flip the script a little bit as I had you on my podcast some time ago.
Right, this time I get to ask the questions, so it's
I like it that
well,
way.
that's cool. I guess yeah, it's nice that we have these crossovers. I just saw Boyce a couple days ago when he was in St. Louis for his book event, so we had a good chance to hang out and talk for a while. It's a big year for Mississippi River themed books. So
Yeah, I guess so.
I thought maybe where we would start is I'm curious how you got interested in the outdoors and outdoor activities. Like, when did that begin for you?
So for me, I think, man, I think it's just I think it's in my blood. I really do, Dean. I think it's for whatever reason, I think it's part of my DNA. But I remember as a kid, my dad taking me, fishing just for bluegill and, running down to the local pond with friends fishing for bluegill and little bass with a worm on a hook and always loved that. And then for me, it really you know, kicked into high gear. I was fortunate enough to go to a summer camp in northern Wisconsin called Camp Manitouish and in Boulder Junction, Wisconsin. And it's kind of a classic canoe camp. You do like, in camp activities as a kid, archery, uh, riflery, tennis, bicycling, all that fun stuff. And then the big component of that camp is a canoe trip, a wilderness canoe trip. And so as you progress through the ages, I went from like I loved it. So I went from when I was maybe 8 all the way until I was 17, and you progress each summer, something like that. Maybe I was a little older when I started, but you progress longer and longer wilderness trips as you get older. And you start on a 2 or 3 night canoeing trip in Wisconsin, and the culmination, I was fortunate enough when I was 16. I did a 30-day canoe trip in Saskatchewan through this camp. And then when I was 17, the next year, I did a 45-day backpacking trip in the Brooks Range of Alaska. And for me, man, that just, you take a 15, 16, 17-year-old kid and you throw them out in the middle of the woods, like it was just magic, and it just totally jived with what I enjoyed, with what I liked. Uh, I remember one specific time we were backpacking in Alaska and walking down this like loose scree field after we had just summited a pass, like a saddle, in order to get across a mountain range, and we were coming down on this loose scree field, and I just remember looking all across the mountains of Alaska and just thinking like, boy, I am a long way from the cornfields of Illinois. And I just loved it. And so since then, since those trips, I just kind of took it on my own and kept running with it, kept doing all kinds of wilderness trips, anywhere from a day to, as long as I possibly could. And yeah, I was hooked and have been hooked ever since. And yeah, I love getting outside anytime I can.
That's pretty amazing at that age to be out on trips for that long. I remember like in high school, like being able to go away for a week for a camp, like so that seemed like a luxury. So 30 days or 45 days, that wasn't even anything on my radar at that age. So
No, I mean, and it wouldn't have been for mine if I hadn't have gone to that summer camp. And you know, as you can imagine, those summer camps aren't cheap. So I was fortunate enough to have a family that was supportive of what I wanted to do there. But I had my brother and sister also went to the same summer camp, and they went 2 or 3 years and petered out because it wasn't their thing. But for whatever reason, it clicked with me, and yeah, I feel real lucky to have found a passion at such a young age, and to be able to stick with it. I mean, there's a lot of people, as you know, who go through life without any kind of passion. So to be able to find something like that, yeah, it's been great for me.
I know you live in northern Illinois now, not too far from the Wisconsin border, as I remember. Like, is that home for you? Is that where you grew up?
It is. Yep. Yep. I'm here in DeKalb, Illinois, is where I live, about halfway between the Mississippi River and Lake Michigan. here in Northern Illinois, and I manage a pig farm. I'm a pig farmer here.
Wow.
So that's the day job.
How long have you been farming?
So I took over. So I went to college and left in Colorado and left DeKalb and was hightailing it out of here, never to come back. And I went to college and I studied to be a, sports announcer, which was another passion of mine, sports at the time. Now not quite as much, but so I studied broadcast journalism, and from Colorado, I moved to South Dakota for, I think, 4 years. And I had a radio show out in South Dakota, and I did all the local high school sports on the radio in South Dakota. And then I moved to Montana for a few years. And so I was gone about 10 years from my hometown. And then I was kind of spinning the wheels a little bit. I was working at a fly shop in Montana at the time. Uh, and yeah, my dad called me and said, "Hey, the current manager of our family farm here isn't working out. We have to make a change. Would you be interested in coming back and helping with the farm?" And at the time, didn't sound that interesting, didn't sound right, but I thought about it more and yeah, decided to come back, and it's been a great decision. Yeah, I have a wife and a little kid here now, and my baby gets to see my grandparents right down the her grandparents right down the road. In fact, my daughter's with my with my mom right now. So yeah, it's been a blessing, man. It's been great.
Wow, so you've come full circle in that way then. You had a chance to get out and explore some for a little while, then come back to work the family farm. Uh,
Yeah, absolutely.
this a total digression, but I'm just sort of curious, like, do you know like how many generations that farm has been in your family or?
Yes, it would be my great grandfather purchased it in 1905, I believe. He came in a covered wagon. My grandfather, my dad's dad had him when he was in his 50s, so he was older. And so my grandfather was born in 1899, and they came in a covered wagon from Southern Illinois and settled here in DeKalb on the same piece of property that I'm on now.
Wow. Well, that's a good story.
Yeah, it's neat.
Um, so when you were growing up, other than going up to the camp in Wisconsin, like what was kind of the landscape you got to explore as a kid around there that get you outside when you weren't busy helping on the farm?
It's funny. I never appreciated the stuff I had around me until I've come back. As a kid, you're with your friends, it's always like, this place sucks. It's flat, it's all full of corn. There's nothing to do. I mean, I would go out and fish, basically was the big thing, was yeah, bluegill fishing and bass fishing with a worm and a bobber, just at the local pond with the friends after school. But outside of that, it wasn't really too much. We would take one or two vacations a year and go out west and, see the mountains of Colorado or, wherever else we might have gone. I did a road trip through South Dakota once, but for the outdoor stuff around me, I didn't really understand it and experience it until I moved back. And even while, after I moved back, I've realized like, wow, it's a mecca for Illinois and Wisconsin for canoeing, which is what I love to do. I mean, when I was in Colorado and Montana, there's no canoers out there. There's no water for it. Uh, and yeah, there's all kinds of beautiful little streams, creeks, rivers, all right around me, pretty close. I got the mighty Mississippi, an hour, 20 minutes to the west, Lake Michigan to the east, and all kinds of little creeks and streams to explore between there. And yeah, it's been cool to explore the home country that way and in a way that I didn't as a kid.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Yeah. When did the Mississippi trip come into play then? Were you already back working on the farm by then, or it was before?
It was before. So I did the Mississippi in 2017, and I did the Yukon the following summer in 2018. So how the Mississippi came about is ever since that backpacking trip in Alaska when I was 17, in the back of my head, I was like, man, I need to do another big trip. I just know I need to get out there. It was just something in my gut really that was pulling me. And for whatever reason, like many adventurers, Huck Finn and whoever else, the largest river, the mightiest river of the land was calling me. And I really can't explain why, other than I knew I wanted to do a big long trip. I knew that the Mississippi, was storied and long, and I could do one big long trip without too many portages. And yeah, for whatever reason, I just knew I needed to do it. And so at that time, I was working in South Dakota at a radio station, and I had been working there a few years, been doing a good job. Everybody was happy with the work I'd been doing. And I had finally, it had been building up inside of me over a number of years. And finally, I was like, you know what? I've saved a little bit of money, not much, but a little bit of money that I could go and do this if I wanted. And so, yeah, I made the decision. And the hardest part of the whole Mississippi River trip, 103 days solo, was walking into my boss's office and telling her what my plan was. And I asked for a leave of absence, and somehow she granted it to me. I said, hey, this is a dream of mine. Basically, how I put it was, this is a dream of mine. I'm going to go canoe the Mississippi River. Um, I'd love to come back and work with you if you'll have me. If not, kind of, I understand. And lucky enough, yeah, she gave me a leave of absence, 3 month leave of absence. Ended up being a little longer than that. But yeah, I came back and worked at that job another year before I got before I got the itch to go paddle the big river of the Yukon again.
Well, let's talk about the Mississippi trip a little bit more then. Why did you decide to do it solo? A lot of people do it with friends or some you have somebody else to paddle with, kind of share the burden with it, and some people prefer to do it solo. So what was your thinking there?
Basically, I couldn't find anybody crazy enough or dumb enough to do it. When I was doing it, now that I am engaged in this world, with the podcast and uh just I talk to a lot of people about the Mississippi because it's a river I love. Now I'm kind of tied into the world, so I know it's a thing that people do. But back then, I didn't know one person who'd done it. I didn't know it was really even a thing that was possible. I was pretty much just shooting from the hip. I didn't know what it would take. I didn't know what kind of gear I would need, any of that. And the amount of people in the build up to the trip, the amount of people that told me like, "You're doing what? Like, you're crazy. You're gonna go float down a river." I mean, even my own parents, once I got out there and did it, they're supportive. But in the build up to it, they just want what's best for their son. And you're like, you're gonna leave your job and go, float like a hobo down the river. I'm like, exactly right.
Sounds like Midwestern parents.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, it was the solo part was just couldn't find anybody else to go do it with me, and I knew I needed to do it.
So what did you do to prepare for that trip then?
Not much, Dean, not much. Honestly, pretty much just gathering gear that I thought I would need, and I knew basically nothing. My whole thing in my head when I started was I told myself if I could make it to Minneapolis, then I think I could do the entire river. Because, it's a pretty good chunk from the start of the river to Minneapolis. And, so I just kept saying, if I can get to Minneapolis, I think I can do this thing. And boy, there was a lot of learning, learning along the way. I mean, I had, uh, I had a full acoustic guitar. I think I had two cast iron, or I had one cast iron frying pan and a cast iron Dutch oven. I had a cutting board. I was taking the kitchen sink. And of course, in Minnesota is the only state where there's portages because it's before the lock and dam system. So I was my heaviest and most awkward packing wise during the stage of the most portages. But as I went down and progressed through the trip, I kind of whittled down my gear and left things with people and got it to a spot where I felt like, now I can kind of cruise.
So were you in a canoe?
Canoe, yep.
Yeah.
And kind of a funny story. So I started in a Old Town Penobscot, and I paddled to Winona, Minnesota, which is home of Winona Canoes. And that weekend that I was in Winona, I had met at Lake Itasca, the start of the river. I had met a teacher and his son, and it was the summertime, and they were doing like their last father-son weekend, and they're doing a camping trip to check out the headwaters of the Mississippi. And the guy, as he's walking by, kind of inquires what's going on with all the gear. I tell him what my plan is, and he says, "Well, if you make it to Winona, give me a shout." And at that point, I didn't know how far Winona was, didn't know much. But sure enough, I made it to Winona, called the guy. He came and met me at the boat ramp with a cold six pack, and I ended up staying with him for 3 or 4 nights with him, his family, his wife, and his son. And that same weekend that I was there, it happened to be the factory defect sale for Winona Canoe Company. And Winona being a small town, he happened to know the owner of the Winona Canoe Company, Mike Chiganowski. I'm probably mispronouncing his last name. But so we go to this, he takes me to this factory sale because I needed a new paddle, actually, is what I was looking for. And lo and behold, the owner of the company, Mike, is there, and they get to talking. And he's like, "Hey, I just picked up this guy from the Mississippi, blah blah blah." And I get to talking to Mike, and he's like, "Well, what kind of boat you paddling?" And I'm like, "Well, might be like a curse word around here, but I'm in an old town." And he goes, fine canoe, but not the right canoe. And gives me like a whole 2 hour tour, or tells me to come back the next day. So I do. Gives me a whole 2 hour tour of the factory, and then shows me this like brand new Winona Prism, which is like super fast, sleek solo canoe. And the way he described it is he was like, the Penobscot you're in, it's like a mountain bike. This is like a road bike, like a Tour de France bike. And he's like, if you're going to bicycle across the country, you wouldn't do it in a mountain bike. You'd do it in a road bike. And so he offered me a deal that I couldn't refuse on the factory defect a boat. And lo and behold, I left the old town in Winona with Marty and Finn, the people that were putting me up, and finished out the rest of the river in a brand spanking new Winona canoe.
Wow. I love those stories. Like, people on the river are happy to give, right? Like,
Man, it's and then the other thing is that weekend also was Boats and Bluegrass, which is a music festival in Winona. And I've gone almost every year since then, and it's like one of my favorite weekends of the year. It's like two of my favorite things: live music, let alone bluegrass. I love bluegrass, and boats and canoes, like right up my alley. And it just so happened to be the weekend that I landed in Winona originally.
wow. So what time of year is that? If people decide they need to get out there and check it out
You
themselves?
should. Boats and Bluegrass is awesome. It's in September.
All
I
right.
think it's like the middle or end of September every year.
So when you were looking at doing this trip, then did you go just when you started the trip, was that just because that was the only time you could start the trip, or did you think way different times of year for starting it, or
To tell you the truth, I don't remember my reasoning for why I started when I started. I think it was just how it worked out. I started August 23rd, and I think it was, looking back on it, I think it was the perfect time to do it. No bugs, the bugs for the season had died off, and I was chasing the turning leaves the entire way south, which was awesome. It was like I started at Itasca when the leaves were kind of just starting to turn, and the speed of my travel downriver was like the same exact speed that all the leaves were turning at. So like everywhere I was for that first, huge section of it, I was like right on the line of leaves turning. And yeah, it was really pretty. And then when I got down into the south, it was November, December. I think I ended early December. So it wasn't scorching hot which is good for a northerner like me.
Absolutely. I remember I haven't done too many overnight trips on the Mississippi up north of the cities, but I remember one time I did, I was surprised by how cold it got overnight. It was mid-August, and I woke up and it was 41 or 42 degrees. So you must have had some chilly nights too during that stretch.
There was some chilly nights. Yeah, I remember the chilliest I remember was like kind of in that northern Missouri, southern Illinois kind of section where you're not really into the heart of the South yet. And during that November kind of September, November time frame, you can still get some cold nights. And there was a few times I woke up with a little bit of frost on the tent, but it wasn't anything too bad.
Well, I mean, you'd hiked in Alaska for 45 days by that point. So I guess that's one of the things that's important to emphasize here is it's not like you were a novice getting in a canoe and trying to paddle a long trip for the first time. Like you had a fair amount of experience taking wilderness trips already. You had some skills.
Yeah.
So you had the ability to sort of figure out some things on the fly that maybe I wouldn't have had if I had tried that.
I think that's probably fair. And sometimes I'm maybe too lackadaisical about encouraging people to get out there and figure it out. But I think your assessment is correct. I had been doing even outside of those Alaskan backpacking trip and the Saskatchewan trip, since then, I would organize my buddies and we'd go out and do, 3, 4 nights. I did one on the Missouri River with my friends. So every year I would do a couple trips, 3, 4 night canoe trips. So yeah, I was definitely not a novice. I don't know if I would say I was an expert. Still don't know if I am, but I yeah, I definitely knew a thing or two. I wasn't like totally green.
Yeah. I think maybe we touched on this before too. Like sometimes I worry that today, because there's so much information available, people tend to over prepare maybe for a trip like this. And I don't know what your thoughts on this are, but I wonder if maybe people might, if they feel, if they don't have the confidence or they feel like their skills aren't quite there yet, maybe what they should do is just take a couple of days and do a quick overnight trip somewhere to get comfortable with the gear and the experience, rather than spending hours and hours reading information on Facebook or other sources and trying to feel like they've mastered all these details. Because once the trip gets started, kind of a wild card what's going to happen from day to day.
100%. I definitely agree with that. Yeah, if you can do, in hiking, they call it like a shakedown hike, or like a shakedown paddle where you have all the gear you think you're going to take with you, see how it feels in the boat. Exactly. Do, a 3 or 4 night section, even if it's on a different river than the one you can. Yeah, I highly recommend that. I think that's a great idea. And what you said about over preparing, I think is true. And with that being said, I think it just depends on everybody's personality, like some people are just that analytical and, want to check off every box and make sure that they have, every inch of everything they need. And then probably me on the other end of that spectrum and is, just load up in the boat and go and figure it out. So it's a little bit of a personal thing, but everybody's got their way of doing it. But you're right that there is a lot more information out there now than even when I did it in 2017. There's a lot more information, and that's a good thing, I think. But it's always an odd. I can never say this word, juxtaposition, however you say it. It's always kind of an odd two face where we love these places, and so I want to talk about them, and I want to help people and tell people, but I don't want to give it away. And also, you know, you don't want you don't want to tell everybody your best fishing spot and then go show up and everybody's at your fishing spot.
Right.
But you know, I think I've kind of gotten over that and just gotten to think, hey man, if there's more people out there doing it and enjoying it, uh, it's gonna bode well for preserving these things in the future, I think.
Absolutely, I agree, and I'm with you on that too. I write guidebooks, and people may have already figured this out, but I don't reveal all of my secrets in the guidebooks. Like I want to hold back on a few places that I think are really nice because there's hardly anybody there, and I don't want a bunch of people starting to show up. So, um, but there are plenty of places to go. So,
Exactly.
um, what was the rhythm of the trip like for you? Like once you kind of got underway, what was it like from day to day?
For me, everybody does it differently. For me, I was trying to take in everything I could. I wasn't going for a record speed. I wasn't going for miles per day. For me, I was trying to take in all the river towns. I was trying to take in all of the generosity of the people along the way. I was trying to take in all of the beauty of the river. So I just kind of as a general rule of thumb, I was stopping into town every 5 to 7 or 10 days, depending on the stretch, usually about every 5 days or so. Sometimes more often, sometimes less, depending on the stretch of river I was at. And so I'd go into town, get supplies, run into a Walmart, get food, grab a burger and a beer at a restaurant if there happened to be one. I stayed with lots of people along the way. I think probably, I don't know what the number is, but probably, I don't know, 20 or so different people along the way. And just the generosity of people was amazing, welcoming me into their home, doing laundry, making a meal, just fantastic generosity of people along the way. And so, yeah, the pace of mine was, I'd wake up fairly slow, couple cups of coffee in the morning, 2 cups of coffee, a little bit of reading, uh, push off maybe around 10 or so and paddle until sunset or so, set up camp and repeat.
Rinse and repeat. Did you? I imagine like you probably found people who are helpful all along the river too. Like those of us who live on the upper part of the river maybe associate the river angels mostly with the upper half, and to some degree there's probably a higher concentration in up here. But I imagine you found helpful people along the whole thing.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Along the whole way. And some of them, very few of them were organized through that. And I think it was still kind of in the early days of the Facebook of Mississippi River Paddlers, which is the Facebook page that's kind of become the hub of the through paddling community on the Mississippi River. So there's lots of river angels and lots of people posting on there. I connected with a few people through there, but most of them were just kind of happenstance, genuine encounters where I'd pull over and just be talking to somebody at the restaurant, and they, kind of ask what my story was, what's going on. And pretty easy to tell I was out of place. And yeah, most of them happened that way, and lots of them all on the Southern River too. One in particular that I always remember was in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. I'm a big football fan. I love college football. So that's where LSU is, Louisiana State University. They got a big, massive football stadium there. So one of my goals was to try and go to a game there. And so I stopped in Baton Rouge and was hanging out at the local college watering hole across from the stadium. And sure enough, just, making small talk with a guy. And he's like, oh, yeah, we'd throw a big tailgate over here and blah, blah, blah. And then sure enough, he's like, and I got an extra ticket if you want to go to the game. So I ended up going to this, at this point, it's like day 90 of the trip. I got this nasty, scraggly beard, haven't shaved, probably smell like hell. And I'm here at this just extravagant Southern Louisiana tailgate. And I don't know if you know much about the culture down there, but boy, they know how to tailgate and they know how to throw a party. And it was just fantastic. So yeah, I hung out at their tailgate and then went to the LSU game afterwards. And yeah, it was just a blast, man.
Seems like fate was looking out for you there. Like you managed to talk to the one person that had a spare ticket. So
I know it's funny how it works, man. I think if
yeah.
you put it out there and you have and that's another thing that I've took away from this trip, Dean, is that at both of these trips and other things that I've done is that I mentioned earlier that I was lucky to find a passion in the outdoors, and I think if somebody is genuine, people can tell when you're genuinely like happy or passionate or interested, and you're putting yourself out there and people reciprocate that, um, for whatever reason, people could tell that I was a genuine guy, that I was, just doing something that I loved, and I wasn't trying to, scam anybody or think I'm bigger than I am or any of that stuff. They could just tell that I was genuine and had a passion, and the people come out of the woodwork to help. And I think that's the same thing for uh, the guiding business that I've been doing and for all this different stuff, even more so than like the farm work or just, other work that I do. When people kind of see that sparkle in your eye, for whatever it is, for you, for writing books or for, writing articles or whatever, people tend to want to lend a hand, I think.
I couldn't agree more. Like, just I think we have a pretty good sense for the most part of when somebody's genuine and passionate about something and when somebody's just out to try to get something from us. So, uh, and it seems like most of the people who are among that long distance paddler group, though, like these are all the adventurous, authentic folks who are trying to do something epic for themselves. So, uh, when you got, did you paddle all the way to the Gulf?
Yes, sir.
Which pass did you go down?
So I took the South Pass right down the middle, and I ended just south of Port Eads, out into the past the jetty there, out into the Gulf of Mexico.
Hey, Dean Klinkenberg here, interrupting myself. Just wanted to remind you that if you'd like to know more about the Mississippi River, check out my books. I write the Mississippi Valley Traveler guidebooks for people who want to get to know the Mississippi better. I also write the Frank Dodge Mystery Series that is set in places along the Mississippi. My newest book, The Wild Mississippi, goes deep into the world of Old Man River. Learn about the varied and complex ecosystem supported by the Mississippi, the plant and animal life that depends on them, and where you can go to experience it all. Find any of these wherever books are sold. One of the things I've heard sometimes from long distance paddlers is that there's a bit of a letdown after the trip is over. Like, did you experience anything like that?
Yeah, I mean, it is a change. Yeah, definitely. It's like I think it's similar to any goal, right? Especially a big goal. It's like, okay, I accomplished this. Uh, Now what? And it's like you kind of go from being a like a river celebrity of sorts, stopping in different towns, popping in, everybody wants to talk to you, hear your story, to, all of a sudden you're just another guy, another another
You're just
guy.
Will Collins again, right?
Yeah, exactly. And I think there is some sort of a letdown there for sure. And yeah, it takes getting used to, also because on a long trip like that, you've kind of adjusted your life and you've gotten into the rhythm of the new way of living, which is just traveling by the river. And, you know, going from that into back to the hustle and bustle, back to the, more or less, for lack of a better term, into the rat race. It can be, yeah, it can be a little daunting.
A little disorienting, I imagine, especially like getting back into that routine, the work world after being away for that long.
Yeah, I think that's a fair way to put it.
So what did you learn about the Mississippi from this? How did your perception or ideas about the Mississippi change from doing this
Oh
trip?
man. Well, I didn't know much going into it other than, longest river. And I kind of, people around me where I grew up, you kind of think of it as a ditch, just like there's not much to it. And boy, it is, I learned so much. It's an amazing river, man. And I think the biggest thing is that it's like 2,000 miles of wilderness. It's like a 2,000-mile wilderness corridor right through the heart of America that is so underappreciated and so underutilized by people looking to get outside and outdoors. And I mean, the upper Mississippi in particular, with all of the refuge, the wildlife refuge, you can camp on almost any island in the river. It's public. And then when you get to the Southern River, you have these huge, expansive sandbars that you can camp on, and it's just like it's there for the pickings, but nobody's picking. I don't get it.
Right, right. Well, boy, the time of year you went, you would have had some really gorgeous sandbars on the lower river too. So,
Oh yeah, big, massive ones. That was one of my fondest memories, especially of the lower river is, yeah, just massive sandbars and collecting as much driftwood as you could possibly want. And I would just have like a huge driftwood bonfire and just sit on the shore and watch the barges go by and just watch the wildlife and the birds work and just, literally I would have a huge bonfire. Like I'm talking like, stumps, like almost, the diameter of me. And I would have them by the dozens and, it was awesome.
well, yeah, there's a certain, like you said, like there's kind of a certain freedom from being able to experience that. But also then having the luxury of all that time to kind of look closely at what's going on around you, about the life, the wilderness around you. I understand the attraction of it. I wish more people did.
I'm 100% with you. And I think, that's why I'm happy to talk on your podcast, and I'm glad you're doing your podcast and me my podcast as well, Buffalo Rummer Outdoors. It's funny, I didn't set out to in fact I didn't even really set out to make it like a canoeing podcast, and I don't necessarily think it is. And I certainly didn't set out to do all of the episodes about the Mississippi that I have. I've talked a lot about the Mississippi on my podcast with different folks, but it just naturally keeps coming up because I'm interested in it and I love it. And so I keep getting, different guests who are connected to it and, different people and paddlers and adventurers. And it's just fascinating, man. It's an amazing river. And I think the part that I really love about it and among many things, but it's just like, it just feels like such a diamond in the rough. It feels like we have to fight for people to appreciate it when it shouldn't be that way. It could be like, this crown jewel of paddling and of like outdoor recreation, but yet everybody just like, puts their nose up to it like it's either too big, too scary, it's either a ditch and two barges are big and it's polluted and this and that and so much trash and all this, and it's like maybe those things are true to a small extent, but when you get out there, man, it's as wild as the Serengeti.
Absolutely. And it gets wilder as you go south too. Like the when you get below Cairo, it seems like it feels much wilder and actually is much wilder. I didn't know that. Like when the first time I finally got some canoe experience on the lower part of the river, I had expectations basically of a big ditch between the levees, and I was shocked at how wild it was and how much life there was between the levees.
Yeah, it's amazing. That's one of the things about Boyce Uphold's new book, The Great River. And I got to get my hands on your new Mississippi River guidebook. But that was one of the things that I took away from his book is I forget the term he uses, but it's like the batur, I think, which is the southern term for the forest that is on the like the riverside of the levee. And yeah, it's just like 1,000 mile long forest that runs essentially from Cairo all the way to the Gulf.
Hmm.
And there's like hunting camps and different stuff there, but more or less it's just wilderness. There's no, buildings, there might be a few, camps on stilts and such, but it's just out there for the animals.
Absolutely. And unlike the upper part of the river, there are very few towns that you pass. Like you can go for a lot of miles without seeing anybody.
Yeah, absolutely.
So the Mississippi wasn't enough for you. You decided the next year you had to go on the Yukon. So how was that experience different than paddling the Mississippi?
Oh, well, first, it was funny. I was paddling. So I did the Yukon with one of my old high school buddies. And somewhere on the lower river, somewhere maybe in Mississippi, I specifically remember the spot. I'd been talking to him. I'd been trying to get him to go on this trip, didn't work out. And I'd been talking to him, and I was like, man, we got to do another big river. Like, this is just amazing. And he was like, all right, I'm in. And I was, you know, I'm thank God he was in because at that point I was 100% in too. But once I got off the Mississippi and got back to the job and back into the things, I was like, I can't go again. But luckily I had him kind of there prodding me like, hey, we're gonna do this, we're gonna do this. And he was more of a planner on that second one. So thank God for that because it was amazing. But I would say the biggest difference is the Mississippi was all, not all, but a lot about the towns, the people, kind of the fabric of America, if you will. And yeah, just like traveling America. The Yukon was all about the wilderness, the animals, still about the people, like lots of native villages we popped into along the way that were amazing, the most hospitable and kind people along the way that we met that we didn't expect to. But it was much more of like a rural wilderness, like raw, uh, you're out there as opposed to the Mississippi where it was a little bit more, popping into towns and seeing the fabric of the U.S.
So the Mississippi, because of all the towns and the people who live by, you kind of have this built-in safety net, but maybe you didn't have that on the Yukon then so much, huh?
Absolutely. And it doesn't feel like a safety net when you're out in the middle of the main channel, right? But you're right. And on the Yukon, I mean, there was parts where we were hundreds and hundreds of miles from the nearest road, and no way to get you in or out except for by float plane. And yeah, the wilderness and the grizzly and the wolf and the moose and the salmon runs. Yeah, it was a wild animal up there.
Mm. Um, I'm guessing you would probably rate that more as like an advanced level trip then for you need some
Definitely.
advanced outdoor skills to do as long as you did, especially.
Yeah, I think so for sure. It's just more yeah, it's just more rural, more wild, and you're just kind of on your own more. Obviously you got to take care of yourself no matter where you're at, but if things go south, it's definitely tougher to get out of there.
So is that a source to sea paddle also?
So that one I'm kind of loose and fast with the source to sea term, but no. So this one we started at where the actual river starts, like where the named river on the map begins. It comes out of Marsh Lake, which is just north of Whitehorse, the Yukon Territory up there. And so that's where it starts, which wouldn't be the source. The source is technically like several lakes up. It's like a chain of lakes, and then once the river leaves this lake, that's when it becomes the Yukon. So that's where we started, and we did the first. I want to say maybe like the first quarter of it, or maybe a little bit less, is in the Yukon Territory in Canada, and then you cross over the border near Eagle, Alaska, and then the river bisects Alaska. It's Alaska's largest river, and bisects Alaska kind of north and south, but the river runs east to west and then dumps out into the Bering Sea, which is where we ended.
Wow. That it's a very different feel on the Bering Sea than the Gulf of Mexico, I imagine. So
Yes, absolutely. Boy, it was windy, and I imagine it's windy probably about every day out there. And we ended. Yeah, it was quite the sight.
so what's passport control like when you're entering a country from a river like
Boy, I'll tell you what, not much.
that?
It's pretty funny actually. We were all kind of not worried, but we wanted to make sure we did everything official and did it right. And so we crossed over the border, and we pulled into Eagle, Alaska, and we stopped into like a small little convenience store there. Kind of told him what the deal was and asked him what we were supposed to do with our passports, and he's like, "Oh, you see over there, there's a abandoned laundromat." He's like, "Around the corner, there's a phone booth." He's like, "You pick up the phone and talk to customs." So we're like, okay. So, it would have been just as easy not to do, but we walked up and picked up the phone. We figured we were going to get like, a long questioning, but we picked up the phone, connected to a customs agent somewhere, a landline phone, picked it up. And he was like, "Hey, where are you guys at? What are you doing?" We're like, "We're paddling the Yukon River, just crossed over from Canada into the US." And he's like, "Great, have a fun trip." It's like a 2-second conversation. It was like the easiest border crossing in the world.
I wonder how many times a year they get that phone call. Probably not too many anyway.
I don't think so.
Well, so you have taken these long trips. I've got to believe you have a dream trip or an idea for what you want to do next. So what are you thinking?
Well, things have slightly changed just with life. I'm lucky and happy that I did these trips when I did. Because when I was, I forget, in 2017, I'm 32 now. So I don't know how I was, mid 20s. And when I did them then, I was thinking like, I don't get why, I'm never gonna stop doing this stuff. Like I'll always be able to do it. And, here I am now with a wife and a young child. And it seems like the long trip is I'm definitely gonna do one again, but it seems like it's a little bit more in the distance now. Um, so I do all kinds of weekend trips, and I have my guiding business where I take people on guided canoe trips on the Mississippi and many other rivers across North America. So that keeps me busy and gets me my fill. But to be honest, I want to do the Mississippi again, man. I would love to do a second Mississippi River trip, maybe once maybe once my daughter's old enough and kind of out of the house or whatever, which is a long way from now, even hard to think about. But man,
Maybe she'll want to go with you. Maybe at 12 or 14, she'll be ready to join you on a long trip.
I know it. That would be amazing. I've told that to my wife. Like, yeah, I can't wait till summers when it's like, all right, pack up. We're going for however long it can be, however long they can take it. I'll definitely be planning on doing that.
Nice. Well, but you get to indulge your passion for it though with a podcast, as you mentioned. So you've been doing it for a little while, at least for maybe a couple years now.
Yeah, I started it in I think it was 2020 is when I started. So going on 4 years now. And yeah, it's been great. It's been awesome to be able to connect with like-minded people and pretty easy, just to chat. I like doing it. It's always, of course, not as much now, but when I'm after a long day of work and I'm, hot and sweaty and want to relax a little bit, I'm like, oh man, I got to do a podcast tonight. But every time after I talk to the person, I, am totally rejuvenated and excited and a big smile on my face. So yeah, it's been great and met a lot of cool people, including yourself. And yeah, it's been fun just talking adventure, paddling, talk a lot about canoeing, a lot about the Mississippi, but also all kinds of other stuff. Talked to a guy who skateboarded from Chicago to New York. I
Wow.
talked to a guy. One of my favorites was a guy named Buck Nelson who he's paddled the Mississippi and he's done all these crazy trips. But he's a was a retired Alaskan firefighter, like a smoke jumper. And so he would go and in rural Alaska or wherever throughout North America, jump out of a plane with like a three-man crew, fight these fires, and then he would take his off season and do all of these just epic, amazing trips. And one of them he did was 70 days on the Alaskan coast. I think it was 70 days he did. And he's done all kinds of different trips, but this one in particular, he went with, I think he had a rifle and a fishing rod and no food. And he wanted to see how long he could stay out there. And so yeah, he lasted 70 days and just off of fishing and hunting and foraging. And I thought that was pretty amazing.
Wow. Yeah. He's got some advanced skills.
Yes, no doubt about that, man. He's an Alaskan bushman.
Yeah, goodness. The whole it seems like a whole different personality character that manages or that stays living in a place like Alaska. You have to be a certain kind of person to really appreciate that and tough it out.
Oh yeah, it's a and you feel that when you go up there, man. Have you ever been?
I have not on
Yeah.
an expedition like that, but I've traveled as a tourist up there. Yeah.
Yeah, you can kind of feel it, you feel like the people you talk to, it's like they're either they weren't running from something necessarily, but there was a reason that they got up to Alaska, and there was a reason that they stayed. And whether it just be, for the life or whatever, or trying to get away from the hustle and bustle, or, just settling into a more natural state, but you can kind of feel those characters around.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's a very unique place. I'd love to spend more time up there.
Me
Probably in a
too.
car, probably a road trip for me rather than a long, but who knows? You never know.
Hey, there's many ways to do it.
That's absolutely. So you do guided trips too, now, like when you're not busy with the farm or raising your daughter or interviewing people for your podcast. In your spare time, you have these little trips that you also arrange. So tell me a little bit about those.
Yeah, they've been an absolute blast. And this will be my, I guess it'll be my either third or fourth season doing these trips. I just started them because, I had all my friends and people asking me like, "Hey, I'd love to do one of these trips with you sometime," because I'm always going on these trips, whether it's 3 nights, 2 nights, 4 nights, however long. I always doing these trips and posting pictures, and people were always asking, and so I decided, I'll throw a few trips together and see if anybody wants to go with me. And sure enough, the first one I did actually in 2022, the first commercial trip I did was up to the Yukon River, and we did the headwaters of the Yukon, which is just a stunning trip. I don't do that trip anymore because it's tricky to deal with the permitting process through Canada. But that was the first trip I did, and yeah, I've just kind of been rolling with it and growing with it since. The past 2 seasons. I've done 5 guided trips per year, and this year I'm on pace for the same. And then I'd like to eventually kind of transition, or try to transition to doing the guiding, the podcast, and some of the other creative stuff more on a full time pace. But yeah, it's been a blast. So I do trips. Right now, we do trips to the Green River, which is in Moab, Utah, on Labyrinth Canyon, which is just. Do you know anything about that?
I don't.
Oh man, you got to check it out. It's stunningly beautiful. It's like the Grand Canyon, except for it's all flat water, and so you're paddling. It's like you're on Mars. You're paddling, and there's these huge, towering red rock cliffs on either side of you, and it's desert camping, no bugs, super easy living, camping on sandbars, and just beautiful sights. And yeah, it looks just like the Grand Canyon. Just
Mm.
truly, truly spectacular. One of the best canoe trips in North America. So I do two of those this year. I did have two in October. In past years, I've done one in May. In 2025, I'll be doing one in May. And then this is my first year doing a trip on the Mississippi, which I'm super excited about. I'm hoping that this one kind of comes to be a classic for me. One of the guys that I took on a Moab trip, on the Green River trip last year, was talking to me, and he's like, "Hey, I've always wanted to see the Mississippi. I know you're well versed in it. Why don't you put together a trip on your favorite part of the Mississippi, and we'll do it next year." So next year is here now,
Wow.
and so
So what's
yeah,
the route going to be for that one?
we are starting north of La Crosse, and we are ending just south of La Crosse, which is your neck of the woods, right?
I lived in La Crosse for 6 years. Yeah, I love that area. I live in
Okay.
St. Louis now,
Yeah. Okay.
but
So
yeah, I
we're
lived in La
starting
Crosse for 6 glorious years.
great. We're starting on the Trempealeau River, and we're ending Goose Island just south of La Crosse there. It's a 4 night, 3 night, 4 day trip. And if anybody's listening, I don't know when this is coming out, but I still have one or two spots available on that trip. It's in July 20th, July 26th that weekend, and it's called Mississippi River Bluff Country Canoe Trip. So if anybody's listening and wants to join, please do. And also, I'll have more trips for the 2025 season coming soon. But yeah, I'm really excited for that one. Like I said, it's a new one. And as you know well, that section of the river is just awesome. It's like huge rolling bluffs. just beautiful water, all the back channels. It's like you almost think you're in like Appalachia or something.
Mm. Yeah, it's a really gorgeous stretch of river, and there's a lot of a variety to what you see too. So that's a really a good choice for an expedition to lead. Well, this will
Absolutely.
probably go out early July of 2024,
Okay.
so people can still look up your. We'll be able to still sign up. Sign up. People will still have time to sign up for the trip. Um, I know in the past you've also done some Wisconsin River trips. Is anything
You
like
got
that
it.
coming up or?
Yep. Yeah. I got one in August on the lower Wisconsin, which is another, I think, another unsung hero. I talked to people in the paddling community, and you mentioned the Wisconsin River, and they're like, I don't know, blah, blah, blah. But the section that we do, I think it's partly because there's a lot of outfitters on the river higher up, higher up river. We end at the confluence of the Mississippi and the Wisconsin River there at Wyalusing State Park. And again, stunningly beautiful. I feel like I'm using that a lot, but it's true. And yeah, it's just amazing. Camping on sandbars. It's a awesome trip, really beautiful. And that one's 3 nights, 3 nights, 4 days. And next year as well, I'm excited. I'm going to be doing a bald eagle sightseeing trip. So one of the groups that I'm taking on the Green River in October is it's a guy who's a wildlife photographer, and he does wildlife photography workshops. So he is going to be doing a workshop on the trip. So he's bringing the group, and I'm leading the group down the river. And then he's incorporating his photography workshops onto the trip. And so that'll be really neat. But then next year, I'm in the talks with him to do a bald eagle and birds of prey specific trip, because on this section of the Wisconsin, man, they're everywhere. I think we saw over the 4 days, we saw over 70 bald eagles last summer when we did it. So yeah, it's spectacular. So I'm looking forward to that. And I think that'll be a cool, kind of a cool niche as well, to do the specific bald eagle viewing trip.
I think so. I mean, the bald eagles kind of get a lot of attention in January, but it's probably a lot more comfortable and more fun to be out there when the weather's warm and you can spot them
I think so.
when you're traveling around that way. Um, I like that stretch of the lower Wisconsin too, though. It's a lot like the Mississippi that nearby, except it maybe some shallower and certainly not any commercial traffic to worry about.
Yeah, exactly. It's a little tamer, a little more manageable. Um, but there's some sort of allure to be on the mighty Mississippi too.
Absolutely. So, how can people keep up with your podcast, find out about your trips, those kinds of things? What's the best way to follow your work?
Best way to do it is you can check out the website. It's buffaloroamer.com. I have all the trips listed there. You can put a deposit down for a trip, or the best way is just to email me as well. I got all my information on the website, buffaloroamer at Yahoo. I'm pretty active on social media. Instagram is the one I just personally do the most. But Instagram, Facebook, all that stuff is at Buffalo Roamer. And then, of course, anywhere you listen to podcasts, if you're listening to this, you know how to listen to podcasts. So just search out Buffalo Roamer Outdoors is the name of the podcast. And that's probably a good place to start for people, is to check out the podcast and go listen to the episode with you.
Well, you've had a lot of terrific guests. I don't know if I count as one of them or not, but you've had some really terrific guests on there. I've been enjoyed listening to you talk with them with folks about their adventures and their experiences. So it's a great podcast, especially if you're interested in outdoors and if you're interested in maybe taking some longer trips and going a little deeper. I think it's a podcast you should be listening to for sure. Well, Will, thank you so much for your time. This was a great discussion. I appreciate you taking out, making some time for me in your busy schedule, and I wish you the best the rest of the year.
Absolutely, Dean. You too. Good to connect. And yeah, I enjoy listening to your podcast too, and hearing different stories from the river. And yeah, keep on keeping on. And hopefully we can reconnect down the line somewhere.
I'll see you on the river with any luck.
Amen.
Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this episode, subscribe to the series on your favorite podcast app so you don't miss out on future episodes. I offer the podcast for free, but when you support the show with a few bucks through Patreon, you help keep the program going. Just go to patreon.com/Dean Klinkenberg. If you want to know more about the Mississippi River, check out my books. I write the Mississippi Valley Traveler guidebooks for people who want to get to know the Mississippi better. I also write the Frank Dodge Mystery Series that's set in places along the river. Find them wherever books are sold. The Mississippi Valley Traveler podcast is written and produced by me, Dean Klinkenberg. Original music by No Offense. See you next time.